Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Key to Solar Recovery and Closing Sales, Easy Zero Down Financing for Nonprofits. I'm Kelsey Misbrenner, editor with Solar Power World. Before we begin, we wanted to let you know about our application widgets at the bottom of your screen. You can move and resize them however you'd like. Slides are available to view at any time via the resource widget. Submit any questions related to today's webinar via the Q&A widget. Our presenters will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. We encourage you to tweet with us. Simply sign in through the Twitter box. Today's hashtag is automatically added to your tweets. And finally, if you're watching this on demand, you can still use all the features I went over. Let's get started with today's webinar, The Key to Solar Recovery and Closing Sales, Easy Zero Down Financing for Nonprofits. Today's speakers are Tim Olson and Matt Brennan. Tim is the Director of Solar and Storage for Greenworks Lending and oversees their national renewable energy efforts and contractor network. Matt is the VP of Sales for Collective Sun. He is a solar installation expert with experience in both residential and commercial projects. And now I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thanks, Kelsey. Really excited to be here today talking to everybody about CollectivePACE, a product of Greenworks Lending and Collective Sun, and going over how this tool can be used for solar recovery and closing sales with nonprofits. I think this is an especially timely webinar given the change in the economic landscape that we're seeing with COVID. I think there's a lot of nonprofits who could really benefit from the savings of solar, especially as they've seen declines in revenues due to restrictions on gatherings and things like that, but also more difficulty finding traditional financing or putting up the cash to install that solar system. So we really see CollectivePACE as the solution to that problem and want to go over how that works with you all today. But thank you to Solar Power World for hosting this webinar with us. I'm really excited to get into it. So here's what we're going to go over today, what we really want you all to get out of this. So first, we'll just start with a brief overview of our companies and the product that we put together. I'm going to go through what PACE is. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy, and I'll explain kind of the history, how it works. Matt will give you an overview of Collective Sun's third-party ownership structure called their Solar Power Agreement. And then we'll really go over what it means when we combine these two. So PACE financing for Collective Sun's Solar Power Agreement through what we call CollectivePACE. What are the benefits? How can you use that to close more deals? What does it mean? And then we'll end it with the qualification process, how you can reach out to us, see if a project qualifies, and then walk you through the process from there to close and building a solar system on a nonprofit. Quick overview here of Greenworks Lending. So again, my name is Tim Olson. I oversee our solar and storage work. Greenworks Lending is a commercial property assessed clean energy finance provider. We're 100% private capital. PACE originally started as this idea for financing solar on residential buildings in California. But then several years ago, the Connecticut Green Bank was tasked with setting up the first successful commercial PACE program, so PACE financing for commercial property owners. The architects of that first program saw huge potential to grow the program and spread it throughout the country as a solution to help commercial property owners access affordable capital to make these energy-saving, water-saving building improvements. So 5 years ago, they started Greenworks Lending, and since then we've grown tremendously and are now in 15-plus states, having closed over 260 PACE transactions. 3 years ago, we did the industry's first PACE securitization. And we really see ourselves as kind of a white glove service. We work with contractors on how to market and sell PACE financing. We work with the property owners on what does this mean? How do you go through the process? How do you apply? We handle everything with the PACE administrators, which I'll go over, and how we walk them hand in hand through that whole process. So we see ourselves there from the very beginning through the sales process, to the underwriting, to the application process, to closing, and then after working with contractors on disbursements and making sure the project gets built. We really care about the success of PACE and making sure that this is going towards our mission of helping commercial property owners decrease their energy and water usage through affordable financing. I'll go over really how PACE works, and it helps explain this map in a little bit. But just so people understand right now, PACE has to be enabled through state legislation. This has grown rapidly over the last several years. The dark green here is where Greenworks Lending is currently financing projects. So you can see a lot of the Mid-Atlantic up to Massachusetts will soon be online. A lot of the Midwest, the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, Texas, the West Coast, California, Oregon, really all over. And then these medium and light green are states that are in the process of setting up their PACE programs, and we should be there in the next year or two financing projects. I'm going to hand it over to Matt to talk to you about Collective Sun.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Matt Brennan. I'm the VP of Sales at Collective Sun. And a little background on Collective Sun. We started in 2011, and our focus has been with nonprofits and other tax-exempt entities of all kinds. And we work across the country. When we talk about tax-exempt entities, a lot of our clients are faith-based organizations, but there are lots of kinds of tax-exempt organizations, HOAs. There are some golf courses you may not know, but the clubhouses are organized as a type of a tax-exempt entities. We've done a PACE project, a collective PACE project with Tim actually on a golf course. So whenever a customer doesn't have a tax appetite, and that could be a for-profit as well. Some for-profits don't have a tax appetite. That's our client. And our main product is a solar power agreement. We started this a few years ago. Some of you are already familiar with it. But the best way to describe it is it's like a prepaid power purchase agreement. It is a prepaid service contract, but when we started a few years back, it was a prepaid PPA. We changed from a prepaid power purchase agreement for a number of reasons. One, the tax reform bill of 2017 changed some of the accounting treatment of a prepaid PPA to make it less favorable to investors. So we switched to a service contract. But that had another benefit of working, getting away from a PPA. The host still sees really all the same benefits, but with a service contract, it allows us to operate in even more areas. For example, we had a large project that we just completed in Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. They don't allow PPAs, but they allow leases and energy service agreements and things like that kind of third-party ownership. So we're allowed to operate there. So for those of you across the country who may work in areas where certain kinds of third-party ownership is allowed, there's a good chance we can operate there. But again, our main product is SPA, and basically what it is, we provide 12%. It's like a tax-like credit or a discount to tax-exempt organizations, and again, for-profits with a tax appetite. We own the system, we operate it, we maintain it, and we provide a performance guarantee to the installers, and performance guarantee to the host, and ownership of the system. So we own the system, and at the end of the 6-year, ownership transfers back to the customer. So the customer really is a second owner of the system. We're the first owner. Let me jump to the next slide here. So like I said, we work across the country. Most of our clients, I should say most, but a lot of our clients are communities of faith, churches, synagogues, work with mosques, temples of different kinds, spiritual centers, but also with schools, HOAs. We've done Salvation Army projects. So whenever you're running through a situation where the customer doesn't have a tax appetite for whatever reason, a solar power agreement might be a really good option for them. And when we combine it, and we'll talk more of this in a little bit, when we combine it with a CPACE loan with Greenworks, it becomes a zero down option, which is really nice. We can go into these nonprofits or any tax-exempt organization, offer them zero down, and they have to borrow 12% less. And Tim, I'll hand it back to you to talk a little bit about CPACE.
Yeah, great. So I'll just give you a pretty brief explanation on how PACE financing in general works, and then we'll really get into how the combination of PACE with the structure Matt just explained works. I know this can be a little confusing, so I definitely encourage everybody to use that Q&A button at the bottom for any questions, and we'll make sure to leave plenty of time at the end to get to them. So CPACE stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. Basically, this is enabled through state legislation that defines certain types of commercial real estate improvements as a public benefit. And then this allows them to place a voluntary tax assessment on their property to finance those improvements, and then pays that loan back through a line item on their tax bill. So what does that really mean? It means that we, as a private capital finance provider, can finance 100% of their project cost over a long period of time, over a long term, at a fixed rate. And then rather than paying monthly payments back to a bank or putting any cash up front, they can build that system and then start making payments back to through their property tax bill. This really, when we take this to go to the capital markets and raise our financing, this looks like a very secure system of finance. So that's what allows us to do 20, 25, or even up to 30-year terms in many states at that low fixed rate. So it's like a security enhancement for us. But for the property owner, what it looks like is, rather than putting up cash, rather than going to a bank for a shorter 5, 7, maybe 10-year term financing, they're able to get the longest term financing at a fixed rate, which helps them bring down their annual payment as low as possible. And really the only mechanical difference is they're paying it on their property tax bill rather than monthly installments. So whenever they would normally pay their property tax bill is when they would make those PACE payments over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. This provides a number of other benefits that we'll go over in a minute, but I want to just stop there and let Matt go over the solar power agreement in a little more detail.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim pointed out, the CPACE loan provides, the bulk of the funding for these projects. They're providing typically 88% of the funding. We're providing 12%. Our minimum size is 50 kilowatts. So on larger projects, we can increase our discount, and then Greenworks will lend a little bit less. We use, when we're doing projects, obviously all solar projects, but also storage. So storage is eligible for CollectivePACE of the solar power agreement. So keep that in mind. So the SPA, the solar power agreement I mentioned earlier, is like if you're familiar with prepaid PPAs or prepaid lease, just think of it that way. But it is a service contract. The term of SPA is technically 20 years. It's a 20-year agreement where we own, operate, and maintain the system. And again, we provide a performance guarantee. But at the end of the 6th year, ownership of the system transfers back to the customer. So keep in mind, with CollectivePACE, the customer's borrowing money. They may be borrowing money on a 10-year loan, 20-year CPACE loan. It could be a 25-year CPACE loan, possibly even longer. But the customer will own the system at the end of the 6th year. But they'll still have this, let's say, debt obligation to Greenworks for a little bit longer than that. Now, again, the question comes up, can storage be included? As I said earlier, it can. If anybody has any questions on that, just reach out. There are some considerations with that make sure that the storage is 100% eligible for the tax credit. In most cases, it is these days. And we're responsible, as the owner of the system, Collective Sun, with its solar power agreement, handles all the O&M. So all operations and maintenance is ultimately our responsibility. So there's a lot of contractors on the call today, a lot of brokers. we would work with the contractor that we're doing business with, to perform that O&M. If something wasn't covered under the warranty, that would be Collective Sun's responsibility to pay the contractor to fix it or to replace the equipment. All of that falls on us. So I'm going to jump to the next slide here and just talk a little bit what is CollectivePACE. And CollectivePACE is really simply just a combining of a Greenworks CPACE loan, so a PACE loan from Greenworks, and our solar power agreement. Our solar power agreement, lowers the cost that the customer needs to borrow. They only need about typically 88% of the project cost because we're putting in at least 12%. So this is a zero down solution. So if you have a for-profit that without a tax appetite or any tax exempt entity, you have a zero down option. And Tim's going to talk a little bit more about, sort of the benefits of the underwriting from CPACE. But generally speaking, we have a much better luck, getting loans for nonprofits that typically have trouble getting money from traditional lenders. So it really is, can make it much easier for you to close projects. And it's really just a pretty simple, it's a simple process. It's a simple concept. CollectivePACE is really just combining a prepaid service agreement with a CPACE loan. Now, there are quite a few benefits that I've mentioned. Bring up the next slide here. Now, it's zero down. All the projects we see are cash flow positive. And of course, when you borrow 12% less when you use a solar power agreement, the economics just get better. A typical question that comes up is what happens in markets where there are SRECs or there are other utility rebates or maybe even a state rebate. All of those stay with the host. The customer gets to keep all of that. Really, the only benefits that we are monetizing are the tax credit and depreciation. That's it. A nice thing, and Tim will talk a little bit more about this, with the way the timing works with the CPACE loan, because the PACE loan sits on the property tax bill, there's a payment holiday. Typically, there's half a year or so where there aren't any payments due. And one question that comes up a lot, people ask, they say, well, if it's a nonprofit and it sits on the property tax bill, I thought nonprofits don't pay property tax. Well, a lot of times that's true. But they're still on the property tax rolls. They just get a bill for zero. So CPACE still works and CollectivePACE still works for nonprofits and in all tax exempt entities. A great thing about this with CollectivePACE and CPACE in general, there is no credit score, there is no personal guarantee. The loan is based on the property value, not credit. And that's a really big thing, I think, particularly with nonprofits. So keep that in mind when you're going out there. It's a zero down solution. It's very easy to qualify. The terms are long, so they're cash flow positive. And we're seeing a lot of interest from nonprofits in general. Jump to the next slide. And Tim's going to talk a little bit more about just the, overall on PACE and sort of the benefits of doing these kinds of loans.
Yeah, and definitely repeating some of these points, but they are powerful solutions. I just want to make sure that everybody really gets, why this is such a powerful tool. Also, just really quickly, I'm going to address a couple of the questions I've seen come in. So one that I forgot to mention, this is paid back through the property tax bill. But nonprofits, even though they are property tax exempt, are all able to take advantage of this program. So they still have a property tax ID number and often do pay these tax assessments. So even though they're not paying property taxes based on the value of their property, they may still pay for a sewer line or a sidewalk or something like that. This is the same as that. So they're able to voluntarily place an assessment that they pay through their property tax bill, even though they are tax exempt. So this is 100% open and available to nonprofits. I saw some other questions that I think will get answered in this slide. So I want to just go over a couple more of the benefits of PACE and CollectivePACE. So We talked about the 100% financing. That really means it covers all of the hard costs, all of the soft costs. So if there needs to be a feasibility study, or there's legal fees involved, or they're restructuring things to make this happen, all of those costs and all of the costs of financing can get included into the loan. So they're paying $0 up front. This CollectivePACE option is very, very powerful for the solar, where we provide the discount, but we can also add in non-solar components into the loan as well. So in most states, PACE can cover solar, a new roof. So if they have an aging roof and they need to replace that to put the solar on the roof, we can include that as well. And most situations, they can get some of the discount on that as well. If they want to replace their HVAC or boiler or chiller, energy efficiency improvements like windows, lighting, building control systems, and then on a lot of states, water efficiency as well. So if they're doing tenant improvements or something, maybe not tenant improvements for a nonprofit, but if they want to put in new low flow toilets or things like that, we can wrap that all up into the same loan, where they're getting the 12% discount on the solar, some of the storage or the roof, and finance all these other improvements over a long period of time. And those are all improvements that are going straight towards their operating expenses and reducing those. So these still have those cash flow benefits. And even for some of those improvements that don't necessarily have a cash flow associated with them, like the roof replacement, oftentimes the savings and the cash flow savings from the solar and energy efficiency go to offset that capital expenditure. So churches that need a new roof, it's often a difficult process for them going out and raising money from congregation members or things like that, or a civic center or a youth center or something like that needs to replace their roof. They can combine that with a solar installation to help offset some of that cost, so they're not coming out of pocket up front. So that 100% financing is really powerful when you look at a building holistically and all of the improvements that they need to make. Also, one thing that is really powerful is, as we've talked about, these are often entities that, these aren't Target or Amazon, where they have plenty of cash on hand to be able to cover these types of installations. These are often, nonprofits who can, if they don't have to make that upfront capital expenditure on their new roof or on their solar system, that money goes towards their mission, and that's something we really care about. I saw one question about this. This transfers automatically on sale. So that's another huge benefit to PACE plus this collective son arrangement and all PACE loans. Because it's placed on the property tax bill, it stays with that property on sale. So if they're not sure what they want to do with their property in 3 years, 6 years, whatever, that can be a detriment to them trying to go out and get a traditional bank loan, where if they end up needing to sell or they want to sell a portion of it or something like that, they're going to have to pay off that loan. This never accelerates. So at no point do they need to pay off the remainder of the PACE loan. So they can finance a solar system over 20 years, sell that building in 5 years, get those 5 years of benefits, sell it, and then the next owner has that same solar system but picks up where they left off on payment. So it's really useful when you run into a property owner who's hesitant to sign and move forward because they're not 100% sure of what their plans are for their building. It also, when you avoid having to go to your bank to take out another loan, that preserves their borrowing capacity if something else comes up and they need to make non-PACE eligible improvements to their building in a couple of years. This is a long-term fixed financing that doesn't use up their credit or borrowing capacity with their bank. So that's another thing. If you have someone hesitant, I really want to do the solar system, but what if I need those $500,000 next year for some damage to the building or something like that, or some program that they want to invest in? So this really allows them to preserve that capital. And then, because we're secured by the property value, because we're being paid back through the property tax bill, what we really look to is, the value in that building. So this allows them to unlock some of that value in their building. And we don't do a credit check. We're not requiring personal guarantees. We do a basic underwriting to make sure that they're capable of paying their debt service, because we don't want to, put any nonprofits underwater. And obviously we care about making sure they stay in business. But it's not to the same degree as other traditional financing that they may not be able to qualify for. So we've done a lot of talking about kind of the benefits. I want to kind of give you a real-world example of how this worked and hitting on all those points on a project that we did last year through CollectivePACE. So beginning of 2019, there was a golf and country club in Central Valley of California that was working with a local solar installer and was really interested in doing a large solar installation. They had very high electricity rates. They were paying about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. And they're charging up their golf carts, and there's a large event center. There's a really nice golf course with a large area that they use for weddings and things like that, like a typical country club. So they had really high electricity bills, and we're looking for ways to cut that down. They did not have, so there's a 300 kilowatt system, it was about $720,000. They did not have the, cash on hand to make that type of capital expenditure. And went to banks and were having trouble as a nonprofit entity. So they're structured as a nonprofit, a benefit to their community and a social club. And they were having difficulty qualifying for traditional financing. So it was looking like this project wasn't going to move forward. They couldn't pay cash. They couldn't get a loan. They heard about CollectivePACE and came to us. We were very quickly able to pre-screen the project, let them know, yes, this is somewhere where we can do it. This is a project we're interested in. We worked hand in hand with the property owner and the contractor. Collective Sun owns this system. So this is a 300 kilowatt system with carports, rooftop, and some solar panels on the cart barns as well. So this is a really cool project, I think. They own the system, and they passed along a 15% discount. This means that instead of having to finance $720,000, Collective Sun provided $100,000 of the project costs, and then the borrower financed $600,000 with us. And we were able to finance that over 25 years. And as I said, they're paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour. They saved $42,000 in the first year. Also want to make sure I hit on the timeline, which is a huge benefit to this as well. If they were to take out a bank loan, they would have had to start paying immediately on this system from monthly payments as soon as they take out the loan. Here we started working with the contractor. We started building the system. We closed on financing, and they started building the system over the summer. In California, property tax bills are paid every December. So they were able to close on financing, build the system, and not make a single payment until December 10th of 2019. And that payment, they were already cash flow positive on the savings from the electricity bill. So as you can see here, we were able to take a project that was about to fall apart and provide a solution that got it done and helped them start realizing savings. And now they're going to realize almost $2 million of savings that is going to go to their operating income over the next 20, 25 years. So it's a really powerful solution when you have nonprofits who are running into a lot of the traditional problems they have with getting solar built. And nonprofits are a huge subset of the property owners in the country. I think I saw reports that there's maybe 1.5 million different nonprofits in the United States with $5 trillion in assets. So this is a huge subset of property owners who are having a difficult time financing solar projects that can go to immediately help their bottom line. And so we see CollectivePACE as a powerful tool to help unlock that entire property segment. I'll go over this one pretty quickly because I apologize. The text is really small. But this is, I changed the numbers around a little bit. This is a sample cash flow. If anybody's curious to look at the exact numbers of this is a 220 kilowatt system, $500,000. In that example, I just went over, the property owner and the contractor came to us. We were able to put together something that looked very similar to this to say, okay, here's what we can finance. Here are the costs involved. Here's what your annual payment will be. Compare that against your utility bill savings and see the positive cash flow. So here at a 20-year term, 6.2%, and 14 cents a kilowatt hour, their annual payment went from, having to put $500,000 up front or doing bank financing over 5-7 years, which would be, closer to $100,000 a year. We were able to bring their annual payment down to $43,000 a year. And at 14 cents a kilowatt hour, they're cash flow positive from year one. happy to, if anybody is looking for additional details or examples or things like that, please follow up with Matt and I after this, and we're happy to. I realize you can't see too much of this, so we're happy to provide that. I know we're really just hammering some of these points home, but just want to go over it one more time, comparing cash to a bank loan to CollectivePACE. A lot of these benefits we've gone over, the no personal guarantees. This is fixed rate financing, so we don't have to worry about balloon payments. That property owner, when we close and show them that cash flow, they know exactly what their payment is going to be for the next 20 years. And comparing that to escalating electricity prices, there's a lot of value there. Transferability we went over, and then one other thing I just wanted to make sure to hit on, obviously in that scenario, they were able to close in early summer and not make a payment until their next property tax bill, which was December. In a lot of situations, if they are interested, we can push that out up to 24 months. So they can close, build the system, see electricity savings, and they're just accruing some interest in that time, but it allows them to see those savings before they have to make their first payment. And I think especially right now where people aren't really sure what's going to happen in the next 6 months, I think that option to kind of get back on their feet, get their operations going again before they have to make a payment will help get a lot of deals across the finish line. Just a couple other things that aren't on this list that I also want to hit on that Matt talked about. If you're financing it with cash or a bank loan, they're owning the system. They're not going to be able to take advantage of the tax credits. They won't have that production guarantee. So Collective Sun provides a production guarantee that they're going to at least see a certain amount of savings. They won't have that O&M. They won't have the partner in Collective Sun operating it, maintaining it, monitoring it, letting them know if there's a problem. This takes, there's a ton of additional benefits with having a third party there that, nonprofits are worried about their day-to-day operations. They're not, energy experts, and so having an energy expert like Matt and Collective Sun there is really helpful getting them comfortable with the expectations of the savings that they're going to be seeing. So that was a lot about the benefits. I'm sure people have questions about, okay, well, how do I go about actually qualifying and getting this financing? So I'll turn it over to Matt to talk about that.
Thanks, Tim. So just to take a quick step back, and I'm going to talk about the qualification process, which is very, very simple. But just a quick recap, there are really just two agreements here. We have the PACE loan, right, that provides the 88% of the funding. It may provide a little bit less if it's a bigger project because our discount will come up a bit. But that's one contract or one set of documents, the loan documents. And what I'm talking about here in the qualification process, excuse me for 1 second. The other contract is a solar power agreement. That's a 12% discount. That's with Collective Sun. So there are two contracts, the solar power agreement or the SPA between us and the customer, and then the customer will have the loan docs with Greenworks. So when you come across a client, again, a nonprofit or a for-profit with a tax appetite, typically what you want to know is what's the annual payment. You have $1 million system, what's the annual payment? What's that going to cost? If you want to get a quote from us, it's very simple. All you need to do is send an email to CollectivePACE at Greenworks Lending. Include who they are, the address, the total system size, and the total system cost. If it has storage, just be sure that the entire storage project is ITC eligible. I won't get into the details on that, but if you call either myself or Tim, basically all you need to be sure of is that the storage is charged 100% by solar, that there aren't any electrons from the grid hitting the batteries. If that's the case, the entire discount applies. So if you just send those four simple things to CollectivePACE at Greenworks Lending, we'll send you what the annual payment is. Now, if you want a little bit more information, if you want to see a project cash flow, which Tim went over in a few slides previously, we need just a little bit more information. We need to know, what the annual savings is, so we can compare what the annual savings is to the annual loan payment to see the cash flow, and also include the kilowatt hours if you can. Now the question comes up that says, well, what's the kilowatt hour rate on these projects? Well, it's a loan coupled with a solar power agreement, so there really isn't a kilowatt hour rate, but you can calculate one, and we can help you with that. Basically, add up all the loan payments, and then you divide that into the total production of the system. The issue with that is you may be comparing it against a 25-year PPA or a 30-year PPA. So you have to get you want to, think about that a little bit, or talk with us a little about that, because you want to compare the same time frames. But that is the qualification process. Very simple. Just send an email to the email address shown here with very basic information, and we'll tell you what the annual loan payment is. Now, to be part of CollectivePACE, there's a few things that you need to include. And we've made some enhancements here that I think are really great news that really simplifies things. One thing that we do require is an extended warranty on the inverters of 20 years. So if you're using something like SolarEdge, we really like, or SMA, SolarEdge is a 12-year inverter warranty. I believe the optimizers have a 25-year, but the inverter warranty is 12. Include the cost to extend that to 20. The contractors require a 10-year workmanship warranty. If that, that really came out of, with our tax and tax equity investors out of California. That's where we get our start. So that's standard in California. But if that's an issue or that causes any heartburn for anybody, any contractors on the call, give me a ring. We can talk it over. We also have a 2-year performance guarantee with every contractor. Now, it's a very modest performance guarantee. It's not meant to be punitive in any way. And it's set to 90% of PV watts. So if it only kicks in if it underperforms 90% of PV watts. And that's after all D rates. So if you have shading D rates, or if you include some soiling as a D rate, it would come after that. So again, it is modest. And on the insurance requirements, just want to touch on these briefly, and happy to talk about these in more detail. But these are insurance requirements for the contractor. You probably have 4 out of 5 of these. Now, general liability, require that. Workers' comp is required if it's required by law. If it's not required in your state, you don't need it. Automobile insurance, sure you have that. Professional liability, insurance for errors and omissions. A lot of times people refer to that as E&O insurance. The person who stamps the plans and does structural, typically they have that. You may not have that in-house, but the PE, the professional engineer who ends up putting the stamp on structural, and generally speaking, already has that, and that's all we need. Now, builder's risk insurance, you may or may not have that. It's great when you do. And builder's risk really, it covers a number of things, but one of the main things it covers is equipment on site that hasn't been installed yet. That wouldn't be covered on property insurance. So we've had this happen. We've had equipment stolen from a job site. We had some storage equipment. There was quite a bit, so it was quite a bit of money, but it was covered. It was stolen, but builder's risk insurance covered that. So it's important to have that. Now, if you don't have that, a great enhancement that we have now with Greenworks is that they have a builder's risk insurance program. So it's possible you can opt into that for a very modest fee, and those fees are all built into the cost of the system. So if you don't have builder's risk insurance, just reach out to Greenworks or reach out to myself, and we can put you in touch with the right people and opt in your project. So that's a basic qualification process. Just send an email to the address shown there with some very basic information. We'll get you back the annual payment. So we're starting to work with more and more contractors across the country. We've got some great testimonials. Tim went over a really fantastic project with a golf course in California. So we're hoping to hear from, mostly it's contractors and sales professionals on the call. We're hoping to hear from a bunch. And we're really getting a lot of traction with the nonprofit community throughout the country. I think that wraps it up for us. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself or to Tim directly. And I think we're going to go into Q&A here.
Yep. All right. Just a reminder that you can continue to submit questions at any time in the Q&A widget. And we will start with the first question. Can brokers charge consulting fees or receive a broker fee?
I can cover that. Yes, they can. We can finance that into the loan if they have an agreement with the property owner or the contractor, whoever it is that they're working with. If there are broker fees, those can be included into the loan, and we can include that.
Thank you. Next question. Someone asked if you have an analysis tool that you can share.
Yeah, I saw that come up. Do you want to answer that, Tim?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do. Our typical process is if we have a contractor who wants to work with us, we normally take a look at like a first project together, make sure, we go over all the steps and we're on the same page, and we like to walk them through it. Once we have an NDA executed with them, we have a tool that contractors can build their own proposals, and the CollectivePACE, Collective Sun ownership option is built into that tool. So they can put in, the project cost, the year one savings, year one kilowatt hour, things like that, select CollectivePACE as the owner, and then see kind of that, something similar to that cash flow slide that I went over. So we're happy to, with any contractors, work with you to kind of get you uploaded into our system so we can start sending you some proposals and then teach you how to use that analysis tool yourselves.
Hey, Kelsey, can I add something to that real quick?
Sure. Yep.
And if any contractors do use Angie Toolbase or something like Aurora Solar, we have custom incentives built in for this. So just reach out to me, and I can show you how to do that.
Thank you. Next question: where did Merced save the $2 million on operating costs that you mentioned?
Yeah, so this was a purely solar project. So all of the operating costs were utility bill savings. So Collective Sun owns the solar system, but 100% of the electricity goes to the property owner. So everything generated by that 300 kilowatt system is offsetting the electricity bills for that property owner. So they're in a fairly unique position where they're in Central Valley and PG&E, and they have 20 cents a kilowatt hour electricity. So every kilowatt hour is offsetting that much. They were saving about $40,000 in the first year, and then assuming a 3% escalation in utility costs, which is in California right now a little bit conservative. We've seen 7, 8, 9% escalations this year, and I think PG&E will continue to go up. Over 25 years, that's close to $2 million in savings.
Thank you. Next question: how much equity on the property is required to be eligible for PACE in Maryland?
So the equity requirements change a bit state to state. I'd actually have to check on Maryland. I believe it's 10%. So really what that question I think is asking is, when you combine PACE with any other debt secured by the property, kind of how much leverage can we have on that property? So Greenworks, our minimum requirement is a 5% equity. So if you take the mortgage plus the PACE debt, it can't be more than 95% of the value of the property. We also have, and I think I saw some other questions about this, and we can finance on standard commercial property types up to 35% of the value of the property. And then for special use, and a lot of nonprofits fall into that, and most do, we can finance up to 25% of the value of the property. So if you have 25% of the value of the property loan for the solar system and any other upgrades, plus any mortgage, it just can't exceed 90 or 95% of the value of the property. And if there are, we realize this is one of the difficulties of PACE is that it is different in every single state because they have to pass their own legislation, and everybody wants to be a little bit unique. And once the state passes the legislation, counties have to opt into a program and can set up their own programs. So there are some minor differences. For the most part, they're almost exactly the same, but there are little tweaks like that equity requirement. We are more than happy if you just have an address and you want to know, is this eligible for a CollectivePACE product, and what are some of the things I should know about this jurisdiction? Please email Matt or myself, and we're more than happy to give you an initial screen and let you know about that jurisdiction.
Thank you. Next question: could a nonprofit build a system that covers their usage and creates extra power that they could offer as community energy to members of their institution?
Matt, you want to take that one?
We'd have to take a little closer look at what the overproduction would be. My initial answer is yes, it's possible, but we'd have to take a little bit closer look. We have built systems that overproduce because they were planning on, for extra equipment. I think it was more on the order of 10%. They were going to do a big increase in air conditioning or doing it maybe in addition to the property. So we would have to get a little bit more details, but reach out to Tim or I, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's nothing about PACE that would prevent that, although we do need to look at where it is and the state on for-profits who don't have a huge electricity load and are in one of those states where they can do community solar. We have been able to finance those types of projects. They're a little bit more complicated because of some of the legislative requirements for PACE. So yeah, like Matt said, we're happy to look. We're always getting more creative, coming up with new products. And so we're more than happy to help work through that process.
Thank you. Next question, what's the difference between a PACE financing arrangement and a PPA?
Want me to jump on that, Tim, or you got that?
Yeah.
Ahead,
so, yeah, I'd say there's PACE, there's CollectivePACE, and then PPAs. So comparing those, PACE by itself can be used to finance a solar installation where they own it. They take all the tax credits. By they, I mean the property owns it, it takes all the tax credits. Comparing a PPA to CollectivePACE, CollectivePACE is, there's a lot of similarities. They're both, upfront, $0 down financing. PPA, normally they're paying for exactly the energy that they produce, or that the system produces. With the solar lease arrangement that we have with CollectivePACE, it's also $0 upfront, but they get 100% of the electricity, and they make a set payment each year, so they know exactly how much they're going to pay. If it overproduces, that's just extra benefits for them. Also, a lot of PPAs, the way they're financed, they will look at they rely on the underlying operating business to be able to pay that bill annually or monthly or whatever it is. And so there's a much more rigorous kind of credit review application process for that. And there are nonprofits who can't qualify for a very attractive PPA, but because we're secured by the property value, we're able to provide solutions for those property owners who aren't able to get a very strong PPA option. And maybe, Matt, you can go over kind of some of the nuance between a PPA and your lease structure as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. So a PPA is literally agreement to purchase power. So let's say you have, let's take a church, for example. It's a 100 kilowatt system for a church. If they go and get a PPA, and let's say the PPA rate comes in as 20 years and it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and maybe there's an escalator, maybe there isn't. But that was, somebody offers them the PPA, and again, it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour. They got to buy energy at whatever it produces at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That would be a PPA. Now, whoever's offering that PPA has to underwrite that project. So it's going to be based on the credit. So that's one thing to consider. It could be a good option for them. I don't know. But it's going to be based on the credit worthiness of that entity. And so a lot of times that can be hard to do. So then when you compare it to CollectivePACE, it's going to be typically, a lot of times the CPACE loan will also be 20 years. Okay? Now, they're not going to borrow 100% of the project cost. You're going to borrow 88%. That's it on a system that size. And they have a 20-year PACE payment. So if you're going to compare, you compare what the PPA, if you want to compare CollectivePACE to a PPA, it's not really that difficult to do. You basically just compare what the annual payments are on a PPA versus the annual payments on a CollectivePACE project. Now, one of the big differences here is that, on a lot of projects, it's going to be a lot easier to get CollectivePACE qualified, right? Because it's not going to be based on the credit of the nonprofit. Now, if it's a San Diego Zoo, for example, which is a nonprofit, probably a lot easier to, the creditworthiness of an entity like that might be a lot easier to underwrite. But a lot of projects that you see out there, CollectivePACE is a great option, really because that loan is based on the property, not on the credit. There are no personal guarantees. So, those are some of the differences. And again, if you want to compare the numbers, just compare the annual payment on a PPA versus the annual payment on a CollectivePACE loan. And this whole thing is really based on what the contractor charges for the system. If we have a $4 per watt installation cost, the annual payment is going to be high. And, the effective kilowatt hour rate, if you will, you can back into a kilowatt hour rate, will also be high. But, if you see a project at $1.75 a watt, we're seeing some very low effective kWh rates and some very low annual payments and some big saving numbers over the years. I think Marianne asked that question, and if you have any questions for Tim or I on that, it's a really good one. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Next question, are municipally owned buildings like police stations eligible for this?
Yeah, so this is something I forgot to mention when going over just PACE financing, but unfortunately, publicly owned property is not eligible for PACE because they actually don't have the property tax bill, and we can't enforce them to pay a property tax bill. So there's really very few commercial type buildings that we can't do. They are municipally owned buildings, gas stations, and any residential that's under 5 units. So we can do multifamily, and we can do affordable multifamily housing, but we can't do it if it's under 5 units because then it's considered residential. So we also can't finance residential property. But otherwise, basically any type of privately owned commercial property. We went over a lot of the nonprofits, but also, retail, office space, multifamily, hospitality, all of those qualify. And if they don't have the tax liability like we went over, can qualify for CollectivePACE as well, or can take advantage of the CollectivePACE discount.
Yeah, and just real quick to add to that, there's a huge universe of tax-exempt entities that, are eligible for CollectivePACE. And, but, if they're a for-profit, for example, can use a tax, and they can use a tax credit, obviously CollectivePACE is not the best option. You should talk to Tim, though, about a CPACE loan and let them monetize a tax credit. You don't need, Collective Sons SPA for that. That's a whole different thing. But, if you do run into, like we've done a police association and we've done museums and some municipalities, that doesn't really fit into the CollectivePACE universe, but there are other, there could potentially be other options that we could talk about for some of those.
Thank you. Next question, what are the disadvantages to CPACE?
Yeah, so I can try and, take this for a couple. So one of the disadvantages is just the structure of CPACE. Obviously, you need state enabling legislation, and then you need the county to opt in. So it is not available everywhere. Happy to send around that map to anybody interested. And like I said, send us the address of any potential project, and we can let you know if it's opted in. One other thing I didn't mention is, if it is in a state with enabled legislation, we're constantly working with new states to pass enabling legislation. But if it's in a state where the legislation has been passed, but that county for some reason hasn't opted in, we're more than happy to, and have in the past many times, worked with that property owner, the contractor, and connecting them with the county officials to get it opted in. A lot of times the county just hasn't had the motivation to pass an ordinance yet, but if they have a local nonprofit property owner in their county saying, hey, I want to take advantage of this, that's sometimes all the motivation it takes to get them to pass that ordinance. So we're happy to work on that. One of the others, this doesn't come up as much with nonprofits, but we need to always be contracting with or financing the property owning entity because they're placing a voluntary tax assessment on the property. So if this is a nonprofit who is leasing the building, we would need to be connected with the property owner in order to place that assessment on the property. That said, PACE actually has another benefit that I didn't mention, but a lot of times that nonprofit, if they're leasing, they get a long-term lease on a building for a youth center or something like that, Their lease agreement, if it's a standard triple net lease, will have them paying the property tax as well as the electricity bills. So where you normally would have this disalignment of incentives between the owner of the building and the entity paying the electricity, and the owner of the building being the one who would normally need to finance the system, here you can align those incentives. So the nonprofit could connect us with the property owner, and then they would pay for the system through the tax bill, as well as see the electricity savings. So it's a unique structure with a ton of benefits, and when it does work, it absolutely helps get projects done that might not otherwise go, but we need to make sure, we're working with the right entity. I think some people had asked some questions. Obviously, if you have a huge system on a property with very little property value, we're not going to be able to finance more than 25 or 30% of that value. So we need the right kind of property, or they need to come up with cash or other financing for the remainder of that project cost. And we just need to make sure it's in the right area. But when it is and those things align, it's actually a very streamlined process working with Collective Sun and ourselves to get these done.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Someone asks, is there a prepayment penalty for CPACE?
Yeah, so for PACE loans, there is a prepayment penalty that is standard. If we know what the aversion is of the property owner, or what their building plans are, we can work with them to decrease that or move it around, however that works for them. That said, I'll let Matt go over. They need to own the system for at least 6 years, so there's some structure to that side as well.
Yeah, I mean, the property. I mean, the property owner can change. It can go to a new owner. That's not an issue. We just need to be sure that the equipment stays there for at least 6 years, so that we can fully monetize the tax benefits. Other than that, there aren't any issues. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and that's one thing I did want to make sure to mention. If they are selling the building, obviously with a traditional loan, they would need to pay off that. They would need to pay that off, and there might be a prepayment penalty involved. Here, there isn't really any need for them to prepay it, unless obviously there are some if they want to take out additional leverage on the property or something like that. It's a very small, it's 5% or less, 5% for the first 5 years, but they're not normally paying it off to get rid of the system or something like that in the first 5 years, and then it's down to 3% or 2%. That's on the remaining principal. So normally it's a fairly minimal prepayment penalty, but again, happy to discuss how to make it work with the plans of the building owner if they have any concerns about that.
All right, thank you. That was all the questions we have time for today. If you have any additional questions or we didn't get to yours, please feel free to contact our presenters on your own. Again, this webinar will be shared with all registrants, so you may view it again at your convenience. I'd like to thank Tim and Matt again for being here, and Collective Sun and Greenworks Lending for sponsoring today's webinar. And thank you to everyone in our audience for participating. I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we invite you to join us for more Solar Power World webinars. Thanks, everyone.